The morning sun streamed through the windows of Lahore International Airport as Jasmine Carter pulled her small carry-on behind her. Unlike most billionaires, she preferred to travel light and without fanfare. Her casual outfit, dark jeans, a simple navy blouse, and comfortable flats, was a far cry from what people expected from someone who had just acquired Skylink Airways. Final boarding call for Skylink Flight 237 to Dubai. The announcement echoed through the terminal. Jasmine quickened her pace, her curly hair bouncing slightly as she moved. Today was important. After buying the airline 3 weeks ago, she had decided to experience the service firsthand, completely incognito, no special treatment, no advance notice to the crew. Just an ordinary first-class ticket purchased under her name, which surprisingly few people recognized outside of tech industry circles. As she approached the gate, the attendant smiled warmly, scanned her boarding pass, and wished her a pleasant flight. So far, so good. The jetway was empty as she made her way onto the plane. A flight attendant named Richard greeted passengers at the door with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard," he said, barely glancing at her boarding pass. "First class is to your left." Jasmine nodded and made her way to seat 2A, stowing her bag in the overhead compartment before settling in. She took out her phone, making a quick note about the boarding process. The leather seat was comfortable, though she noticed a small tear on the armrest, something to add to her growing list of needed improvements. The cabin gradually filled with other passengers. A gray-haired businessman took the seat across the aisle, immediately requesting a pre-flight drink. 2 rows ahead, a couple spoke quietly, looking through a travel magazine together. 10 minutes later, another flight attendant entered the first-class cabin. Her name tag read, Linda Reynolds. Unlike Richard's casual friendliness, Linda's expression was all business. She moved efficiently through the cabin, checking overhead bins and occasionally stopping to speak with certain passengers. When she reached Jasmine's row, Linda paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Your boarding pass, please?" she asked, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been with the previous passengers. Jasmine handed over her boarding pass. "Here you go." Linda examined it with unusual scrutiny, turning it over as if expecting to find something wrong. "Is there a problem?" Jasmine asked politely. "Just making sure everything's in order," Linda replied, still studying the ticket. "This seat is in first class." "Yes, I'm aware," Jasmine said, keeping her voice even. She'd dealt with similar situations before. Linda handed back the boarding pass with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Very well, enjoy your flight." She moved on without offering the welcome drink or hot towel she'd provided to the other first-class passengers. Jasmine made another note on her phone. "Different treatment? Check passenger service consistency." From across the aisle, the businessman gave her a sympathetic look. "First time in first class?" he asked kindly. "Not exactly," Jasmine replied with a small smile. As the final passengers boarded, Linda returned to the first-class cabin with welcome drinks on a tray. She served each person with practiced efficiency, making small talk with most. When she reached Jasmine, she placed the drink on the tray table without a word and moved on quickly. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard and announcing a flight time of 6 hours and 20 minutes to Dubai. The safety demonstration began, with Richard and Linda demonstrating the procedures at opposite ends of the plane. Once they reached cruising altitude, the service began in earnest. Linda distributed warm towels to refresh the passengers, menu cards for the lunch service, and took drink orders. For some reason, she kept forgetting to include Jasmine in these rounds. After being overlooked twice, Jasmine pressed the call button. Linda appeared moments later, her smile strained. "Yes?" she asked, barely hiding her irritation. "I haven't received a menu yet," Jasmine said calmly. "Oh, I must have missed you. One moment." Linda walked away and returned with a menu, placing it on Jasmine's tray table. "The chicken is already gone," she added, though Jasmine had clearly heard her tell another passenger just minutes ago that all options were still available. "I'll have the beef then," Jasmine said, watching Linda's face carefully. "Fine. Anything to drink?" Linda's pen hovered over her notepad. "Sparkling water with lime, please." As Linda walked away, Jasmine noticed Richard watching from the galley, with a furrowed brow. He whispered something to Linda, who shook her head dismissively. The man across the aisle leaned over. "Don't take it personally," he said quietly. "I've flown Skylink dozens of times. Some of the crew can be a bit selective about who they think belongs in first class." Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. "How long have you been flying with this airline?" "Going on 8 years now. The service used to be top-notch across the board, but lately it's been hit or miss. Rumor has it they've been sold to some tech company. Probably going to go downhill from here." He sighed. "That's how it usually goes." "You think so?" Jasmine asked, genuinely curious. "Oh, absolutely. These corporate types buy airlines without knowing the first thing about running them. They just see numbers on a spreadsheet." He shook his head. "No offense if you're in the corporate world." "None taken," Jasmine said with a small smile. If only he knew. When lunch was served, Jasmine was the last to receive her meal despite sitting in the second row. The beef was overcooked and barely warm, while Linda checked repeatedly on other passengers, asking if they needed anything else. She bypassed Jasmine's seat each time. Halfway through the meal, Richard appeared at her side. "How is everything?" he asked quietly. "The food could be better," Jasmine answered honestly. He nodded. "I'm sorry about that. Can I get you anything else? Perhaps another drink?" "Some more water would be nice, thank you." Richard returned promptly, with a fresh glass of sparkling water complete with lime. "I apologize for any inconsistency in our service today," he said carefully. Before Jasmine could respond, Linda appeared at his elbow. "I'll take care of my section, Richard," she said firmly. "You're needed in business class." Richard hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. Enjoy your flight," he said to Jasmine before walking away. Linda collected Jasmine's half-finished meal without asking if she was done. "We need to prepare for turbulence," she explained, though no announcement had been made, and she left the other passengers' trays in place. 15 minutes later, a man in a crisp suit emerged from the business class section and made his way to the front galley. He spoke briefly with Linda, whose eyes widened as she looked back toward Jasmine's seat. The man, whose badge identified him as Thomas Chen, operations director, approached Jasmine with a very different demeanor than Linda had shown. "Ms. Carter?" he asked quietly, a mix of surprise and alarm on his face. Jasmine nodded slightly. "I didn't realize you would be on this flight," he said, keeping his voice low. "Is everything satisfactory?" "I'm conducting an unannounced service evaluation, Mr. Chen," Jasmine replied. "Please continue as normal. We'll discuss my findings later." Thomas looked both understanding and concerned. "Of course, Miss Carter, but if there's anything you need..." "Actually, there is," Jasmine said thoughtfully. "I'd like to see how the crew handles service recovery when things don't go as planned. So for now, let's keep my identity between us." Thomas nodded, though he cast a worried glance at Linda, who was watching their interaction with growing suspicion. As Thomas returned to his seat in business class, Linda approached Jasmine again, her entire demeanor transformed. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" she asked, suddenly solicitous. "Can I bring you anything at all?" "I'm fine, thank you," Jasmine replied. She could almost see the wheels turning in Linda's head, trying to figure out who she might be to warrant the operations director's personal attention. For the rest of the boarding and the first hour of flight, Jasmine observed, made notes, and experienced firsthand what some of her passengers might encounter. The groundwork was being laid for a confrontation that would change not just Linda's perspective, but potentially the entire airline's approach to customer service. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged off as the plane reached cruising altitude. Jasmine released her belt and settled more comfortably into her seat, taking out her tablet to review some work while keeping one eye on the cabin service unfolding around her. Linda had been avoiding her section since the brief interaction with Thomas Chen, the operations director. Instead, Richard had taken over, serving the first few rows of first class, much to Linda's visible annoyance. "More coffee, sir?" Linda asked the businessman across the aisle from Jasmine, her voice warm and attentive. "We have a lovely selection of pastries coming around shortly." The businessman nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, that would be great." Jasmine watched as Linda poured coffee with a steady hand, offered cream and sugar, and even placed a linen napkin beside the cup. The contrast with her earlier service couldn't have been more stark. When Richard approached with Jasmine's coffee a few minutes later, Linda intercepted him at the galley. "I can take that," she said, loud enough for Jasmine to hear. "I should handle all of first class. Consistency is important." Richard looked uncertain. "I don't mind. It's my section," Linda insisted, taking the coffee cup from his tray. She approached Jasmine with a completely transformed. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Lahore International Airport as Jasmine Carter pulled her small carry-on behind her. Unlike most billionaires, she preferred to travel light and without fanfare. Her casual outfit, dark jeans, a simple navy blouse, and comfortable flats, was a far cry from what people expected from someone who had just acquired Skylink Airways. "Final boarding call for Skylink Flight 237 to Dubai," the announcement echoed through the terminal. Jasmine quickened her pace, her curly hair bouncing slightly as she moved. Today was important. After buying the airline 3 weeks ago, she had decided to experience the service firsthand, completely incognito. No special treatment, no advance notice to the crew. Just an ordinary first-class ticket purchased under her name, which surprisingly few people recognized outside of tech industry circles. As she approached the gate, the attendant smiled warmly, scanned her boarding pass, and wished her a pleasant flight. So far, so good. The jetway was empty as she made her way onto the plane. A flight attendant named Richard greeted passengers at the door with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard," he said, barely glancing at her boarding pass. "First class is to your left." Jasmine nodded and made her way to seat 2A, stowing her bag in the overhead compartment before settling in. She took out her phone, making a quick note about the boarding process. The leather seat was comfortable, though she noticed a small tear on the armrest, something to add to her growing list of needed improvements. The cabin gradually filled with other passengers. A gray-haired businessman took the seat across the aisle, immediately requesting a pre-flight drink. 2 rows ahead, a couple spoke quietly, looking through a travel magazine together. 10 minutes later, another flight attendant entered the first class cabin. Her name tag read, Linda Reynolds. Unlike Richard's casual friendliness, Linda's expression was all business. She moved efficiently through the cabin, checking overhead bins and occasionally stopping to speak with certain passengers. When she reached Jasmine's row, Linda paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Your boarding pass, please?" she asked, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been with the previous passengers. Jasmine handed over her boarding pass. "Here you go." Linda examined it with unusual scrutiny, turning it over as if expecting to find something wrong. "Is there a problem?" Jasmine asked politely. "Just making sure everything's in order," Linda replied, still studying the ticket. "This seat is in first class." "Yes, I'm aware," Jasmine said, keeping her voice even. She'd dealt with similar situations before. Linda handed back the boarding pass with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Very well. Enjoy your flight." She moved on without offering the welcome drink or hot towel she'd provided to the other first-class passengers. Jasmine made another note on her phone. Different treatment? Check passenger service consistency. From across the aisle, the businessman gave her a sympathetic look. "First time in first class?" he asked kindly. "Not exactly," Jasmine replied with a small smile. As the final passengers boarded, Linda returned to the first-class cabin with welcome drinks on a tray. She served each person with practiced efficiency, making small talk with most. When she reached Jasmine, she placed the drink on the tray table without a word and moved on quickly. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard and announcing a flight time of 6 hours and 20 minutes to Dubai. The safety demonstration began, with Richard and Linda demonstrating the procedures at opposite ends of the plane. Once they reached cruising altitude, the service began in earnest. Linda distributed warm towels to refresh the passengers, menu cards for the lunch service, and took drink orders. For some reason, she kept forgetting to include Jasmine in these rounds. After being overlooked twice, Jasmine pressed the call button. Linda appeared moments later, her smile strained. "Yes?" she asked, barely hiding her irritation. "I haven't received a menu yet," Jasmine said calmly. "Oh, I must have missed you. One moment." Linda walked away and returned with a menu, placing it on Jasmine's tray table. "The chicken is already gone," she added, though Jasmine had clearly heard her tell another passenger just minutes ago that all options were still available. "I'll have the beef then," Jasmine said, watching Linda's face carefully. "Fine. Anything to drink?" Linda's pen hovered over her notepad. "Sparkling water with lime, please." As Linda walked away, Jasmine noticed Richard watching from the galley, with a furrowed brow. He whispered something to Linda, who shook her head dismissively. The man across the aisle leaned over. "Don't take it personally," he said quietly. "I've flown Skylink dozens of times. Some of the crew can be a bit selective about who they think belongs in first class." Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. "How long have you been flying with this airline?" "Going on 8 years now. The service used to be top-notch across the board, but lately it's been hit or miss. Rumor has it they've been sold to some tech company, probably going to go downhill from here." He sighed. "That's how it usually goes." "You think so?" Jasmine asked, genuinely curious. "Oh, absolutely. These corporate types buy airlines without knowing the first thing about running them. They just see numbers on a spreadsheet." He shook his head. "No offense if you're in the corporate world." "None taken," Jasmine said with a small smile. If only he knew. When lunch was served, Jasmine was the last to receive her meal, despite sitting in the second row. The beef was overcooked and barely warm. While Linda checked repeatedly on other passengers, asking if they needed anything else, she bypassed Jasmine's seat each time. Halfway through the meal, Richard appeared at her side. "How is everything?" he asked quietly. "The food could be better," Jasmine answered honestly. He nodded. "I'm sorry about that. Can I get you anything else? Perhaps another drink?" "Some more water would be nice, thank you." Richard returned promptly, with a fresh glass of sparkling water, complete with lime. "I apologize for any inconsistency in our service today," he said carefully. Before Jasmine could respond, Linda appeared at his elbow. "I'll take care of my section, Richard," she said firmly. "You're needed in business class." Richard hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. Enjoy your flight," he said to Jasmine before walking away. Linda collected Jasmine's half-finished meal without asking if she was done. "We need to prepare for turbulence," she explained, though no announcement had been made, and she left the other passengers' trays in place. 15 minutes later, a man in a crisp suit emerged from the business class section and made his way to us, the front galley. He spoke briefly with Linda, whose eyes widened as she looked back toward Jasmine's seat. The man, whose badge identified him as Thomas Chen, operations director, approached Jasmine with a very different demeanor than Linda. "Head shown, Ms. Carter?" he asked quietly, a mix of surprise and alarm on his face. Jasmine nodded slightly. "I didn't realize you would be on this flight," he said, keeping his voice low. "Is everything satisfactory?" "I'm conducting an unannounced service evaluation, Mr. Chen," Jasmine replied. "Please continue as normal. We'll discuss my findings later." Thomas looked both understanding and concerned. "Of course, Miss Carter. But if there's anything you need—" "Actually, there is," Jasmine said thoughtfully. "I'd like to see how the crew handles service recovery when things don't go as planned. So for now, let's keep my identity between us." Thomas nodded, though he cast a worried glance at Linda, who was watching their interaction with growing suspicion. As Thomas returned to his seat in business class, Linda approached Jasmine again, her entire demeanor transformed. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" she asked, suddenly solicitous. "Can I bring you anything at all? I'm fine, thank you, Jasmine replied. She could almost see the wheels turning in Linda's head, trying to figure out who she might be to warrant the operations director's personal attention. For the rest of the boarding and the first hour of flight, Jasmine observed, made notes, and experienced firsthand what some of her passengers might encounter. The groundwork was being laid for a confrontation that would change not just Linda's perspective, but potentially the entire airline's approach to customer service. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged off as the plane reached cruising altitude. Jasmine released her belt and settled more comfortably into her seat, taking out her tablet to review some work while keeping one eye on the cabin service unfolding around her. Linda had been avoiding her section since the brief interaction with Thomas Chen, the operations director. Instead, Richard had taken over, serving the first few rows of first class, much to Linda's visible annoyance. "More coffee, sir?" Linda asked the businessman across the aisle from Jasmine, her voice warm and attentive. "We have a lovely selection of pastries coming around shortly." The businessman nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, that would be great." Jasmine watched as Linda poured coffee with a steady hand, offered cream and sugar, and even placed a linen napkin beside the cup. The contrast with her earlier service couldn't have been more stark. When Richard approached with Jasmine's coffee a few minutes later, Linda intercepted him at the galley. "I can take that," she said loud enough for Jasmine to hear. "I should handle all of first class. Consistency is important." Richard looked uncertain. "I don't mind. It's my section," Linda insisted, taking the coffee cup from his tray. She approached Jasmine with a completely transformed demeanor, her earlier coldness replaced with an almost exaggerated pleasantness. "Your coffee, ma'am," she said, placing it carefully on the tray table. "Would you care for cream or sugar?" "Just black is fine," Jasmine replied, studying Linda's face. "Of course. The pastry cart will be coming through shortly. We have croissants, Danish, and some lovely fruit tarts today." Jasmine nodded. "Thank you." As Linda turned to leave, Jasmine spoke again. "Actually, I have a question about the airline." Linda froze for a fraction of a second before turning back with a bright smile. "I'd be happy to help. I heard the airline was recently acquired. Have there been any changes to service standards or training?" Linda's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We maintain the highest standards regardless of ownership changes. Is there something specific you're concerned about?" "Just curious about the consistency of service across different passenger demographics," Jasmine said mildly. Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. "I assure you we treat all our first-class passengers equally." "All passengers or just first class?" Jasmine pressed. "Well, different cabins receive different service levels, of course, but within each cabin we strive for consistency." Linda's professional mask was firmly back in place, though a hint of defensiveness had crept into her tone. "Interesting. And who monitors that consistency?" Linda shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Our in-flight supervisors and management team conduct regular evaluations." She glanced toward the galley. "If you'll excuse me, I need to prepare the pastry service." As Linda retreated, the businessman across the aisle leaned over again. "You've got her worried now," he said with a chuckle. "Been flying 30 years and I've never seen someone flip from rude to nice so fast. What did you say to that suit earlier?" "Just a work conversation," Jasmine replied with a small smile. "Well, whatever it was, you've got priority service now." He extended his hand. "I'm Henry, by the way, Henry Zhang." "Jasmine Carter," she replied, shaking his hand. Henry's eyebrows rose slightly. "Carter. Why does that sound familiar?" Before Jasmine could respond, the pastry cart appeared, pushed by Richard with Linda supervising closely behind. They served the first row, then moved to Jasmine and Henry's row. "Our selection today," Linda announced, gesturing to the cart with a flourish. Henry selected a croissant while Jasmine chose a fruit tart. As Richard placed their selections on small plates, Linda hovered nearby, clearly trying to overhear their conversation. When the cart moved on, Henry turned back to Jasmine. "So what brings you to Dubai? Business or pleasure?" "A bit of both," Jasmine replied. "I have some meetings, but I'm hoping to extend my stay for a few days." "Same here." though at my age business trips aren't as exciting as they once were. He sighed. Still, Dubai always has something new to offer. Their conversation was interrupted when Thomas Chen reappeared from business class, making his way to the front galley where he spoke quietly to Linda. Whatever he said caused her eyes to widen, and she glanced back at Jasmine with a look of barely concealed alarm. Henry noticed the exchange too. "Friend of yours?" he asked, nodding toward Thomas. "We've met," Jasmine said simply. After Thomas returned to his seat, Linda's behavior shifted yet again. She now approached Jasmine's seat, every few minutes offering water refills, extra napkins, headphones, magazines, anything she could think of. "Is the temperature comfortable for you?" she asked during one such visit. "I could adjust the cabin settings if needed." "I'm fine, thank you," Jasmine replied, "though I noticed the reading light above seat 5C isn't working. The gentleman there mentioned it earlier." Linda blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting Jasmine to be concerned about another passenger's comfort. I'll check on that right away." As Linda hurried away, Henry gave Jasmine a curious look. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "most people who suddenly get special treatment just enjoy it. They don't use it to help others." Jasmine shrugged. "Everyone deserves to have working lights." The next hour passed relatively quietly. Jasmine reviewed documents on her tablet while occasionally making notes about the service flow, cabin conditions, and interactions between crew and passengers. She noticed that while Linda was now excessively attentive to her, the flight attendant's treatment of passengers in the back half of first class remained perfunctory at best. When lunch service began, Linda personally brought Jasmine's meal tray. "Our chef's special today," she announced, setting down a plate that looked noticeably better arranged than those served to other passengers. "I selected the best portion just for you." "Thank you," Jasmine said, "but I'd prefer the standard service. Everyone else receives." Linda looked taken aback. "But I wanted to ensure you had the best experience possible." "The best experience would be knowing that every passenger receives the same quality of service," Jasmine replied evenly. A flash of something, recognition perhaps, crossed Linda's face. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently thinking better of whatever she had planned to say. "Of course," she said finally, her professional mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine confusion. "Will there be anything else?" "Just equality," Jasmine said with a small smile. As Linda walked away, visibly unsettled, Henry leaned over again. "Okay, now I'm really curious. Who exactly are you?" "Just a passenger interested in airline service standards," Jasmine replied. Henry gave her a skeptical look. "Uh-huh. And I'm just a guy who happens to fly international first class twice a month." Jasmine smiled but offered no further explanation, turning her attention to her meal. The chicken was decent, though not exceptional. The vegetables were slightly overcooked, and the bread roll was cold in the center. All details worth noting for future improvements. Mid-meal, a bout of turbulence hit, causing the plane to bounce and sway. The captain's voice came over the intercom, instructing all passengers and crew to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. Linda, who had been serving in the middle of the cabin, grabbed the nearest seat, the empty one beside Jasmine. As the plane lurched again, she clutched the armrests, knuckles white. "Not a fan of turbulence?" Jasmine asked conversationally. Linda gave a tight smile. "It's just part of the job." "How long have you been flying?" 12 years with Skylink," Linda replied, visibly trying to maintain her composure as the plane dipped suddenly. "Started right after college." "That's impressive," Jasmine said sincerely. "You must have seen a lot of changes in the industry." The turbulence intensified, and Linda's professional veneer cracked slightly. "Yes, though not all. For the better," she admitted, perhaps more candidly than she might have under normal circumstances. "Budget cuts, reduced training time, more responsibilities with less staff." "Sounds challenging," Jasmine commented. Linda nodded, then seemed to remember who she was talking to. "Though of course we maintain the highest standards regardless," she added quickly. The plane gave another violent shake, and the passenger in 5D, an elderly man, dropped his water glass. It shattered on the floor, sending shards and liquid across the aisle. "I should," Linda began, half rising before remembering the seatbelt sign. "Stay buckled," Jasmine said firmly. "Safety first." The elderly man looked distressed, trying to gather the larger glass pieces despite the turbulence. "Sir, please don't touch the glass," Jasmine called to him. "The crew will clean it up once it's safe to move around." The man looked up, startled that someone had noticed his predicament. "It's making a mess," he said apologetically. "Better a wet floor than cut hands," Jasmine replied with a reassuring smile. Linda watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. When the turbulence finally subsided and the captain turned off the seatbelt sign, she immediately went to help the elderly passenger, bringing towels and a dustpan. "I'm very sorry about that, sir," she said, cleaning up the broken glass. "Can I bring you a fresh water?" "That would be lovely, thank you," the man replied. As Linda worked, Thomas Chen appeared again, this time heading directly to Jasmine's seat. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, "the captain would like to speak with you when you have a moment." Linda, still kneeling with the dustpan, froze at the mention of Jasmine's name. "Carter?" she repeated, looking up with dawning recognition. "As in?" Thomas gave a small nod. "Ms. Jasmine Carter, yes." The color drained from Linda's face as she finally made the connection. Jasmine Carter, the tech billionaire who had recently acquired Skylink Airways. The woman she had been dismissive toward, then excessively attentive to, was her new boss. "I'll speak with the captain after lunch," Jasmine told Thomas calmly, as if Linda wasn't having an existential crisis on the floor beside them. Linda stood shakily, dustpan clutched in white-knuckled hands. "Ms. Carter, the gentleman in 5D is still waiting for his water," Jasmine reminded her gently. "Yes, right, of course." Linda hurried away, visibly rattled. Thomas lingered a moment longer. "Is everything satisfactory with your flight experience, Ms. Carter?" "It's been very educational," Jasmine replied. "We'll discuss it in detail after we land." As Thomas nodded and walked away, Henry leaned over once more. "Carter, now I remember. You're the one who bought this airline last month, the tech innovator." Jasmine inclined her head slightly. "Well," Henry said with a low whistle, "I bet Linda wishes she could turn back time right about now." "We all make assumptions," Jasmine said. "The important thing is what we learn from them." For the remainder of the meal service, Linda moved through the cabin like someone in a daze, performing her duties mechanically while avoiding eye contact with Jasmine. The atmosphere in first class had shifted tangibly, with several passengers now watching the unfolding drama with undisguised interest. As the lunch trays were cleared, Jasmine continued making notes on her tablet. The confrontation was coming, but not in the way Linda probably feared. Jasmine hadn't built her tech empire by firing people at the first mistake. She'd done it by identifying problems and finding innovative solutions. This situation was no different. Linda had shown her exactly what needed to change at Skylink Airways. Now the real work would begin. The lunch service had ended, and a quiet lull settled over the first-class cabin. Most passengers were either watching movies on their screens or napping under the soft blankets provided earlier. Jasmine continued, reviewing documents on her tablet, occasionally glancing up to observe the cabin crew. Linda had all but disappeared after clearing the lunch trays, presumably hiding in the galley. Richard had taken over most of her duties, moving through the cabin with quiet efficiency. Whenever he passed Jasmine's seat, he gave a respectful nod but maintained his professional distance. About an hour into the post-lunch quiet, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain David Wong speaking. I hope you're enjoying your flight so far." His voice was warm and confident. "I wanted to take a moment to mention that we have a special guest on board today. We're honored to welcome the new owner of Skylink Airways, Ms. Jasmine Carter, who is traveling with us in first class." A murmur of surprise rippled through the cabin. Several passengers looked around curiously, trying to spot the billionaire among them. "On behalf of the entire Skylink team," the captain continued, "we want to express our excitement about the future of our airline under your leadership, Ms. Carter. We look forward to implementing your vision for even better service and innovation in the years to come." Thank you for choosing to fly with us today. All eyes had found their way to Jasmine, who acknowledged the announcement with a small nod. She hadn't expected the captain to make her presence known so publicly, but perhaps it was inevitable once Thomas Chen had recognized her. Across the aisle, Henry chuckled. Well, your cover's blown now, though I'm guessing that flight attendant already figured it out. Seems that way, Jasmine agreed. Not exactly how you planned to experience the airline service, I imagine. Actually, Jasmine said thoughtfully, it's been quite informative. The intercom clicked on again. Flight attendants, please prepare for a brief period of turbulence ahead. As if on cue, the plane began to wobble slightly. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ding, and Richard moved quickly through the cabin, checking that passengers had secured themselves. When he reached Jasmine's row, he paused. Can I get you anything before the turbulence increases, Miss Carter? I'm fine, thank you, she replied. But the gentleman in 7B might need some assistance with his tray table. Richard glanced back to where an elderly passenger was struggling to secure his table. Of course, thank you for noticing. As he moved away, Jasmine made another note on her tablet. Attentiveness to all passengers, not just VIPs, would be a key focus in her overhaul of Skylink's service culture. The turbulence intensified, causing the plane to bounce and sway. From the galley, there was a clatter followed by a small cry of pain. Despite the seatbelt sign, Jasmine unbuckled and made her way forward. In the galley, she found Linda crouched on the floor, picking up scattered cutlery with shaking hands. A thin line of blood ran from a small cut on her palm. You should be in your seat, Linda said without looking up, apparently not realizing who had appeared. So should you, Jasmine replied. But first, let's take care of that cut. Linda's head snapped up, her eyes widening as she recognized Jasmine. Ms. Carter, I was just cleaning up this mess. Let me help, Jasmine said, kneeling despite Linda's protests. She found the first aid kit mounted on the wall, opened it and removed an antiseptic wipe and a bandage. This isn't necessary, Linda insisted, clearly uncomfortable. It's just a small cut. Even small cuts can get infected, Jasmine replied, calmly, taking Linda's hand and gently cleaning the wound. The plane lurched again, but Jasmine maintained her balance, continuing to dress the cut with practiced ease. Thank you, Linda said quietly when Jasmine finished. You didn't have to do that. Neither did you, Jasmine pointed out. You could have left the mess until after the turbulence passed. Linda looked down at her bandaged hand. It's my job to keep things running smoothly, even at risk to yourself. It's not always easy to know where to draw the line, Linda admitted. Especially these days, when we're constantly understaffed and overbooked. Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. Has it always been this way? It's gotten worse over the past few years, Linda said, then seemed to remember who she was talking to. Though I'm sure the financial considerations were necessary, she added hastily. Necessary isn't the same as right, Jasmine said, or smart for that matter. The intercom clicked on again. Ladies and gentlemen, the turbulence has passed, and I've turned off the seatbelt sign. You're free to move about the cabin. Flight attendants will now continue with our service. Linda stood, straightening her uniform. I should get back to work. Of course, Jasmine said, rising as well. Though I'd like to continue this conversation later, if you're willing. Linda looked uncertain. You want to talk to me? I find your perspective valuable, Jasmine said simply, then returned to her seat, leaving Linda standing in the galley with a puzzled expression. Back in first class, the atmosphere had changed. News of the billionaire owner's presence had spread, and passengers were stealing curious glances at Jasmine when they thought she wouldn't notice. A few looked like they wanted to approach her, but none quite had the courage, except Henry, of course. So, he said, leaning across the aisle again. Is this how you usually check on your investments? Undercover boss style? Jasmine smiled. I prefer to see things as they really are, not as people want me to see them. Smart, Henry nodded. Though I imagine your flight attendant friend is having quite the day. It's been educational for both of us, Jasmine replied. The next hour passed. Quietly, Linda had emerged from the galley and resumed her duties, though with a noticeably subdued demeanor. She moved through the cabin efficiently but avoided unnecessary interaction, especially with Jasmine. Meanwhile, Thomas Chen made frequent appearances, from business class, checking that everything was running smoothly in first class. During one such visit, he stopped by Jasmine's seat. The captain would still like to speak with you when you have a moment, he said quietly. Perhaps during our scheduled break period in about 20 minutes? That would be fine, Jasmine agreed. True to his word, 20 minutes later, Thomas returned to escort Jasmine to the cockpit. As they moved toward the front of the plane, Jasmine noticed Linda watching them from the galley, her expression unreadable. The cockpit door opened to reveal a compact space filled with instruments and screens. Captain Wong stood as much as the low ceiling allowed, extending his hand. Ms. Carter, it's an honor to have you on board, he said warmly. I'm David Wong, and this is my first officer, Aisha Patel. The younger woman in the right-hand seat gave a friendly nod, her hands remaining on the controls. Thank you for having me, Jasmine replied, shaking the captain's hand. You have a beautiful aircraft. She's seen better days, Captain Wong admitted. But she's reliable. We're all looking forward to the improvements your company plans to implement. That's actually why I'm here, Jasmine explained. To experience the airline firsthand before making any major changes. The captain nodded appreciatively. That's refreshing. Most executives just look at the numbers. Numbers only tell part of the story, Jasmine said. I like to see the full picture. They chatted for a few more minutes about the flight, the aircraft's condition, and the crew's experiences. Both pilots were candid about the challenges they faced, from aging equipment to scheduling issues. The biggest problem, First Officer Patel said, is that morale has been low since the previous ownership started cutting corners. We're hoping that will change now. It will, Jasmine assured her. Quality and morale are two of my top priorities. As Jasmine prepared to leave the cockpit, Captain Wong had one last question. I hope this isn't out of line, but we couldn't help noticing some tension with one of our flight attendants earlier. Is everything all right? Jasmine smiled. Just a learning opportunity for all of us, Captain. Nothing to worry about. Back in the main cabin, Jasmine found that the mood had shifted yet again. Word of her visit to the cockpit had spread, and now passengers were openly watching her, some even taking discreet photos with their phones. Richard was in the middle of the pre-landing beverage service, offering coffee, tea, and water. When he reached Jasmine's row, he served her with the same professional courtesy he'd shown all passengers. Coffee or tea, Ms. Carter? Tea, please. And Richard, your service has been exemplary today. Thank you. The flight attendant looked surprised, then pleased. Just doing my job, ma'am. And doing it well, Jasmine added. That matters. After Richard moved on, Jasmine noticed Linda approaching her seat with determined steps. The flight attendant stopped beside Jasmine, her professional mask firmly in place, though her eyes betrayed her nervousness. Miss Carter, she said quietly, I wanted to apologize for my behavior earlier in the flight. It was unprofessional and not representative of Skylink's standards. Jasmine studied her for a moment. Why do you think your behavior was unprofessional? Linda blinked, clearly expecting a different response. I was initially less attentive than I should have been. To me specifically, Jasmine pointed out. Not to all passengers. Linda's cheeks flushed. Yes? And why was that? I made assumptions, Linda admitted reluctantly, based on appearances. Yet when you thought I might be important after speaking with Mr. Chen, your behavior changed dramatically. Linda looked down. Yes. That inconsistency is what concerns me, Jasmine said. Not your treatment of me personally. I understand, Linda said softly. Do you? Jasmine asked. Because this isn't about me being the owner of the airline. It's about every passenger who boards our planes expecting fair and respectful treatment. regardless of who they are or what they look like. Linda met Jasmine's gaze, and for the first time, there was a flicker of genuine understanding in her eyes. "I've never thought of it that way," she admitted. "Perhaps it's time to start," Jasmine suggested. "We'll talk more after we land." Linda nodded and moved away, her posture straight, but her expression thoughtful. As the flight began its descent toward Dubai, Jasmine finished her notes on her tablet. What had started as a simple service evaluation had evolved into something much more significant. The incident with Linda had highlighted systemic issues that went beyond a single flight attendant or flight. The captain's voice came over the intercom, once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into Dubai International Airport. The local time is 4:35 p.m., and the temperature is a warm 33 degrees Celsius. On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank you for flying with Skylink Airways today." Jasmine put away her tablet and gazed out the window at the approaching city. The iconic skyline of Dubai emerged from the desert haze, a testament to vision and transformation. Exactly what Skylink Airways needed now. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, Jasmine couldn't help but smile. The real work was just beginning, but she already knew exactly where to start. The confrontation that was coming wouldn't be about punishment or blame. It would be about growth, change, and building a better airline for everyone, passengers and crew alike. And Linda, whether she realized it yet or not, would be at the center of that transformation. The plane had been on the ground for 20 minutes, and most passengers had already disembarked. Jasmine remained in her seat, watching as the final travelers collected their belongings and made their way toward the exit. Henry Zhang paused on his way out. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Ms. Carter," he said, extending his hand. "I look forward to seeing what changes you bring to Skylink." "Thank you, Henry," Jasmine replied, shaking his hand. "Safe travels in Dubai." As Henry departed, Thomas Chen appeared at her side. "Ms. Carter, we've arranged for a private meeting room at the terminal, as you requested. The captain, myself, and..." He hesitated briefly. "Flight attendant Reynolds will meet you there." "Thank you, Thomas." Jasmine gathered her tablet and small carry-on. "Lead the way." They exited the plane together, Linda watching nervously from the door where she was saying goodbye to the last few passengers. Jasmine gave her a brief nod as she passed, noting the flight attendant's tense posture. The walk through Dubai International Airport was brisk, with Thomas guiding Jasmine through less crowded service corridors to avoid attention. They arrived at a small but well-appointed meeting room in the airline's operations area, where Captain Wong was already waiting. "Ms. Carter," he said, rising from his seat, "I hope the flight was informative." "More than I expected," Jasmine replied, setting her bag down and taking a seat at the head of the table. "Thank you for accommodating this meeting on such short notice." "Of course." The captain seemed both curious and slightly concerned about what would happen next. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock at the door. Thomas opened it to reveal Linda standing outside, still in her uniform but having removed her wings, and name badge, a telling sign that she expected to be fired. "Please come in," Jasmine said, gesturing to an empty chair. Linda entered hesitantly, sitting at the far end of the table with her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The bandage Jasmine had applied to her cut palm stood out starkly against her skin. "Before we begin," Jasmine said, addressing the group, "I want to clarify that this meeting is not a disciplinary action. It's an opportunity for open dialogue about what I observed today and how we can improve." Linda's shoulders relaxed slightly, though she remained on edge. "Captain Wong," Jasmine continued, "would you share your understanding of Skylink's service standards?" The captain straightened in his chair. "We aim to provide consistent, high-quality service to all passengers with particular attention to comfort, safety, and individual needs. And is that consistently achieved in your experience?" Captain Wong glanced briefly at Linda before answering. "Not always. Resource constraints and staffing issues have made it difficult to maintain the standards we aspire to." "Thomas?" Jasmine turned to the operations director. I would agree with the captain, Thomas replied carefully. Our intention is excellent service for everyone, but in practice there are inconsistencies. Linda, Jasmine said finally, turning her attention to the flight attendant. I'd like to hear your perspective on what happened today. Linda swallowed, visibly. I behaved unprofessionally, she said quietly. I made assumptions about you based on your appearance, and I treated you differently than other first-class passengers. Then, when I realized who you might be, I overcompensated. Neither approach was correct or consistent with our service standards. Jasmine nodded. That's an accurate summary, but I'm more interested in why it happened. Linda looked surprised at the question. Why? Yes. What factors contributed to your different treatment of passengers? Linda hesitated, clearly weighing her words carefully. I suppose, over the years I've developed certain expectations about who typically flies in first class. And I didn't match those expectations, Jasmine stated. No, Linda admitted. You didn't. Have you received specific training on unconscious bias and its impact on customer service? Linda's brow furrowed. We had a brief module during initial training, but nothing recent or in-depth. Jasmine made a note on her tablet. Captain Wong, Thomas, would you say this is an isolated incident or part of a broader pattern within the airline? The two men exchanged uncomfortable glances. I believe, Thomas said carefully, that while most of our crew strive to provide equal service, unconscious biases do affect interactions throughout the company. It's not unique to Skylink. It's an industry-wide issue. That doesn't make it acceptable, Jasmine pointed out. No, it doesn't, Thomas agreed. Linda, Jasmine said, returning her attention to the flight attendant. In your 12 years with Skylink, have you noticed any patterns in how different passengers are treated? Linda looked down at her hands. Yes, she admitted softly. Certain passengers receive more attentive service than others. Based on what factors? Appearance, primarily. How they dress, how they speak, whether they seem experienced with first-class travel. Linda paused, then added reluctantly, and sometimes race or perceived nationality. The room fell silent for a moment. Thank you for your honesty, Jasmine said. It's not easy to acknowledge these patterns, especially when we've been part of perpetuating them. Linda looked up, surprised by the lack of condemnation in Jasmine's voice. What you may not know, Jasmine continued, is that this isn't the first time I've experienced this kind of treatment. As a black woman in the business world, I've often been underestimated, overlooked, or treated with suspicion, even after becoming successful. Linda's expression shifted from surprise to understanding, and then to shame. The first time I flew, first class years ago, Jasmine went on, the flight attendant repeatedly asked to see my boarding pass just as you did today. When I started my first company and flew to investor meetings, airport security pulled me aside for random checks on nearly every trip. Even now, when I attend industry events, people often assume I'm support staff rather than a CEO. The room remained silent, all eyes on Jasmine. I'm not sharing this to make you feel guilty, she clarified. I'm sharing it because these experiences are common for many travelers who don't fit the expected profile of a first-class passenger or business executive. And that creates an uneven playing field, not just in terms of comfort, but in terms of dignity and respect. I never thought of it that way, Linda said quietly. Most people don't, Jasmine acknowledged. That's why awareness is only the first step. We need concrete changes in training, policies, and accountability. She turned to Thomas. I want a complete audit of our customer service protocols, with specific attention to consistency across different passenger demographics. That includes data on complaints, upgrades, service recovery, and special accommodations. Yes, Ms. Carter, Thomas replied, making notes on his phone. I'll start immediately. Captain Wong, Jasmine continued, I'd like your input on how cockpit announcements and communications might reinforce or challenge these patterns. The captain nodded thoughtfully. We could certainly be more mindful about the language we use and how we interact with passengers during boarding and deplaning. Exactly, Jasmine agreed. Small changes in language and procedure can have significant impacts on passenger experience. Finally, she turned back to Linda, who had been watching the exchange with increasing interest. Linda, I have a question for you, Jasmine said. If you were in my position, what would you do about this situation? Linda looked startled. You're asking me? Yes. Given your experience and your new awareness, what changes would you implement? Linda considered the question carefully. Well, I would certainly enhance training on unconscious bias, making it more than just a one-time module. I'd establish clear metrics for service consistency and hold staff accountable for meeting them. She paused, then added, and I might implement some form of mystery shopping program like what you did today to regularly evaluate the actual passenger experience. Jasmine nodded, impressed. Those are excellent suggestions. You're not going to fire me? Linda asked, the question that had clearly been weighing on her mind since the meeting began. No, Jasmine replied. Firing you would be easy, but it wouldn't solve the underlying issues. It would just make everyone feel like the problem had been addressed when it hadn't. Relief washed over Linda's face, followed quickly by confusion. Then what happens now? Now, Jasmine said, you help us fix it. I don't understand. I'm establishing a new position within Skylink, Director of Service Equity and Training. This person will be responsible for developing and implementing a comprehensive program to address the issues we've discussed today, ensuring that all passengers receive consistent, high-quality service, regardless of who they are or how they look. Linda's eyes widened as she realized where Jasmine was heading. I'd like you to be part of that team, Jasmine continued, not as the director, that will require specialized expertise, but as a key advisor who understands both the current reality and the potential for change. You want me to help? Linda asked incredulously. After how I treated you. Precisely because of how you treated me, Jasmine corrected. You've just experienced a significant shift in awareness about your own biases and behaviors. That makes you uniquely positioned to help others through a similar process. Linda was silent for a moment, processing this unexpected turn of events. This isn't charity or forgiveness, Jasmine clarified. It's a strategic decision. Your experience and perspective are valuable resources for the changes we need to make, but it will require genuine commitment from you. Are you willing to do that work? Linda straightened in her chair, her expression resolute. Yes, she said, firmly. I am. Good, Jasmine said with a nod. Because it won't be easy. You'll need to examine your own assumptions, help others recognize theirs, and push for changes that might meet resistance. But the result, a truly equitable experience for all our passengers, is worth the effort. I understand, Linda said, and I'm ready. Jasmine turned to Thomas and Captain Wong. This approach will extend throughout the company. I expect full cooperation from all departments as we implement these changes. Both men nodded their agreement. Thomas, please arrange for Linda to be temporarily assigned to the Dubai office for the next 2 weeks. She'll work directly with my team as we develop the initial framework for our new program. Of course, Ms. Carter, Thomas replied. I'll make the necessary arrangements. Captain Wong, when you return to base, please communicate to your fellow pilots that similar changes will be coming to flight operations. We want a consistent approach across the entire passenger experience. I'll see to it personally, the captain assured her. Jasmine stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Thank you all for your time and candor today. What happened on our flight was unfortunate, but it's given us a valuable opportunity to address issues that have gone unexamined for too long. As the others rose to leave, Jasmine gestured for Linda to stay behind. Once they were alone, she spoke more directly. I want to be clear about something, Linda. I'm not offering you this opportunity because I'm exceptionally forgiving or trying to make some grand moral point. I'm doing it because it makes good business sense. Bias doesn't just hurt passengers, it hurts our bottom line. How so? Linda asked. Think about it. When passengers feel unwelcome or discriminated against, they don't return. They tell others about their experience. They choose different airlines. That's lost revenue. When staff make decisions based on unconscious assumptions rather than clear protocols, it creates inefficiencies and inconsistencies. That's wasted resources. Linda nodded slowly, seeing the issue from this new perspective. But beyond the business case, Jasmine continued, there's also the simple fact that it's the right thing to do. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of who they are or what they look like. I agree, Linda said quietly, and I'm truly sorry for how I behaved. I know, Jasmine replied. But rather than dwelling on apologies, I'd prefer you channel that remorse into positive change, starting tomorrow. Tomorrow? Linda repeated. Yes. I have a meeting with Skylink's executive team at 10 a.m. I'd like you to join us and share your perspective on what happened today, honestly and without sugarcoating it. Linda took a deep breath. That won't be easy. No, Jasmine agreed. But few things worth doing are. As they prepared to leave the meeting room, Linda had one final question. Ms. Carter, if I may ask, when you realized how I was treating you differently from other passengers, why didn't you just identify yourself? You could have put me in my place immediately. Jasmine considered the question. Because that would have changed your behavior for the wrong reasons, she said finally. You would have treated me better because of my position, not because every passenger deserves the same respect, and nothing would have really changed. Linda nodded slowly, the full impact of the day's events finally sinking in. Tomorrow, at 10 a.m., Jasmine reminded her. Be prepared to speak candidly about your experience and what you've learned. I will, Linda promised. Thank you for the second chance. It's not a second chance, Jasmine corrected gently. It's a first step in a new direction for you and for Skylink. As they parted ways outside the meeting room, Linda with her crew toward the hotel shuttle and Jasmine toward the VIP exit where her driver waited. Both women knew that their unexpected encounter had set something significant in motion. What had begun as a simple flight had become the catalyst for transformation, not just for an airline but for the people within it. 6 months had passed since that fateful flight to Dubai. The early morning sun streamed through the windows of Skylink's newly renovated headquarters in Lahore, where employees were gathering for a special company-wide event. The large conference hall, usually reserved for board meetings and executive presentations, had been transformed with rows of chairs facing a small stage. Jasmine Carter stood quietly at the back of the room, observing as people filed in. They chatted among themselves, many speculating about the purpose of today's gathering. The formal invitation had simply called it a Service Excellence Celebration, but rumors had been circulating for weeks about a major announcement. In the 6 months since Jasmine had taken ownership of Skylink Airways, the company had undergone remarkable changes. New training programs had been implemented, service protocols had been revised, and perhaps most significantly, a new department had been established, the Office of Service Equity and Passenger Experience. As Jasmine watched, Linda Reynolds entered the room, carrying a tablet and conferring with a young man beside her. Gone was the flight attendant uniform. Today, Linda wore a tailored business suit and moved with the confidence of someone who had found her purpose. She looked up, spotted Jasmine, and made her way over. Good morning, Ms. Carter, Linda said with a warm smile. Everything is ready for the presentation. Dr. Patel will arrive in 10 minutes and the live feeds to our international offices are all set up. Excellent, Jasmine replied. And the flight crews? We have representatives from 80% of our active crews here in person. The rest will be watching via stream during their layovers or rest periods. Jasmine nodded approvingly. You've done amazing work, Linda. A hint of color touched Linda's cheeks at the praise. It's been the most challenging and rewarding 6 months of my career. For all of us, Jasmine agreed. Their conversation was interrupted as Thomas Chen approached, now wearing the title of Chief Operations Officer following a company reorganization. Ms. Carter, we're ready to begin whenever you are, he said. The media representatives have been seated in the designated area, and all recording equipment has been approved by communications. Thank you, Thomas, Jasmine replied. Let's give everyone 5 more minutes to settle in and then we'll start. As Thomas moved away, Linda hesitated. Are you nervous? She asked quietly. Jasmine considered the question. Not nervous exactly, but aware of how important today is, for the company, for our passengers, and for everyone who's been part of this journey. Linda nodded in understanding. It hasn't always been easy. True change rarely is, Jasmine replied. The journey from that initial confrontation to today had indeed been challenging. After the meeting in Dubai, Linda had joined Jasmine's team as promised, though not without resistance from some quarters. Several executives had questioned the wisdom of elevating someone who had displayed such obvious bias to a position of influence in addressing that very issue. But Jasmine had stood firm. Her experience makes her valuable, she had told the skeptics, and her transformation will be more persuasive than any training manual we could write. The first few weeks had been difficult. Linda had faced resentment from fellow crew members, who viewed her new role as a reward rather than a responsibility. She had struggled with her own lingering biases and defensive reactions when they were pointed out, and she had nearly quit twice when the weight of confronting her past behavior became overwhelming. But she had persevered, gradually earning respect through her genuine commitment to change and her willingness to share her own journey openly, as a teaching tool. Now 6 months later, the results spoke for themselves. The lights in the conference hall dimmed slightly, signaling that it was time to begin. Jasmine made her way to the stage, where a simple podium stood beside a large screen. The room quieted as she took her position. Good morning, everyone, she began. Thank you for being here today, whether in person or watching from locations around the world. This gathering marks an important milestone for Skylink Airways, one that each of you has helped to create. The audience listened attentively as Jasmine outlined the company's journey over the past 6 months. She spoke of the comprehensive audit that had revealed troubling patterns in service delivery across different passenger demographics. She described the initial resistance to acknowledging these patterns and the subsequent commitment to addressing them. And she highlighted the measurable improvements that had resulted from their collective efforts. But numbers and statistics only tell part of the story, Jasmine continued. The real measure of our progress lies in the individual experiences of our passengers and crew members, and that's what we're here to celebrate today. She gestured toward the side of the stage, where a screen descended from the ceiling. 6 months ago, I boarded one of our flights as an ordinary passenger. What happened during that flight became the catalyst for the changes we've implemented since then. Today, I'm pleased to share with you a brief documentary about that experience and its aftermath, produced by our new training department. The lights dimmed further as the screen illuminated with the Skylink logo. For the next 15 minutes, the audience watched in rapt attention as the documentary unfolded. It began with recreated scenes from Jasmine's flight, showing her initial treatment by Linda and the subsequent revelation of her identity. It then traced the development of the service equity program, including candid interviews with staff members about their own biases and learning experiences. Throughout the screening, Jasmine observed the audience's reactions. Some looked uncomfortable during the more pointed moments. Others nodded in recognition. A few wiped away tears during particularly moving testimonials from passengers who had experienced discrimination. When the documentary ended, the lights remained dim as Jasmine returned to the podium. What you just saw represents both our past and our future, she said softly. The past we acknowledge without shame, but with a commitment to do better. The future we build together with awareness and intention. She paused, letting her words sink in. Now I'd like to invite someone to the stage who has been instrumental in this journey, someone whose courage in confronting her own biases has helped countless others do the same. Please welcome Linda Reynolds, our newly appointed Director of Crew Development within the Office of Service Equity. The audience applauded as Linda made her way to the stage, her expression a mixture of pride and humility. She took her place beside Jasmine at the podium. Thank you, Ms. Carter, she began. 6 months ago, I was a flight attendant with 12 years of experience and a set of assumptions I didn't even realize I carried. Today, I stand before you as someone who has learned that growth begins with discomfort, with the willingness to acknowledge our mistakes and commit to changing our patterns. Linda spoke without notes, her words flowing naturally as she shared her personal journey from that first confrontation to her current role. The hardest part wasn't facing Ms. Carter in that meeting room in Dubai, she admitted. It was facing myself, recognizing how my actions affected others and accepting responsibility for changing them. But I discovered that this kind of honest self-reflection, though difficult, is also incredibly liberating. She went on to describe the development of the crew training program that had now become a model for other airlines in the industry. We didn't just create another sensitivity training module to be forgotten after completion, Linda explained. We built a comprehensive approach that integrates awareness, skill building, and accountability into every aspect of our operations, and we made it personal, because bias isn't abstract. It affects real people in real moments. As Linda continued, Jasmine found herself reflecting on how far they had come. The initial incident that could have ended with a simple firing had instead sparked a transformation that extended far beyond one flight attendant or even one airline. Industry publications had begun featuring articles about Skylink's innovative approach to service equity. Other companies had sent representatives to learn from their example, and most importantly, passenger satisfaction scores had risen across all demographics. Linda was concluding her remarks now, her voice strong with conviction. The journey isn't over, she said. Building truly equitable service is an ongoing process, not a destination. But I'm proud of how far we've come together, and I'm committed to continuing this work with all of you. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause as Linda stepped back from the podium. Jasmine moved forward again to introduce the next segment of the program. Today, we're not just celebrating our progress, she announced. We're also launching the next phase of our initiative. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Aisha Patel, our new Chief Experience Officer, who will outline our plans for the coming year. Dr. Patel took the stage. Jasmine and Linda moved to the side, standing together as they watched the presentation unfold. Thank you for believing in me, Linda said quietly. Her words meant only for Jasmine's ears. Even when I gave you every reason not to. I believed in your capacity to change, Jasmine corrected gently, and you proved that belief well-founded. On stage, Dr. Patel was unveiling the company's ambitious new goals for service equity, passenger, experience, and staff development. The audience listened attentively, many taking notes on tablets or phones. It's going to be another challenging year, Linda observed. Yes, Jasmine agreed, but we've built a strong foundation. When the formal presentation concluded, the event transitioned to a more casual reception. Staff members mingled, discussing the morning's announcements and sharing their own experiences with the changes of the past 6 months. Jasmine circulated through the crowd, listening more than speaking. She overheard a veteran flight attendant telling a newer hire about how the training program had changed his perspective. She watched as a pilot and a gate agent debated the best approach to a particular service challenge. And she noticed how often Linda was sought out for advice or simply to share a success story. Near the refreshment table, Jasmine encountered a familiar face, Henry Zhang, the businessman who had sat across from her on that pivotal flight. Ms. Carter, he greeted her with a warm handshake. Quite an impressive transformation you've orchestrated here. Henry, she replied with genuine pleasure. I didn't realize you were attending today. He smiled. I received a special invitation, as a witness to the beginning, as the card put it. Couldn't miss the opportunity to see how the story developed. And what do you think of the outcome? Jasmine asked. Henry gestured around the room. I think you've done something remarkable. Most executives would have fired that flight attendant and considered the problem solved. Instead, you saw an opportunity for genuine change, not just for one person but for an entire company. It was a business decision as much as a moral one, Jasmine pointed out. Inconsistent service costs us customers and damages our reputation. True, Henry acknowledged. But not every business leader would have taken the longer, harder path to addressing it. Before Jasmine could respond, Linda appeared at her side. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but the media representatives are asking if you'd be willing to take a few questions. Of course, Jasmine replied. Henry, it was good to see you again. Likewise, he said. I look forward to our next flight together, though I suspect it will be much less eventful. As Jasmine moved toward the media area, Linda fell into step beside her. You know, Linda said thoughtfully, when I woke up that morning 6 months ago, I had no idea my life was about to change so dramatically. Neither did I, Jasmine admitted. I was just hoping to get a clearer picture of our service standards. Well, you certainly got that, Linda said with a rueful smile, though not in the way you expected. That's often how the most important discoveries happen, Jasmine observed. Not through careful planning, but through unexpected moments that reveal what we weren't looking for. They reached the area where the journalists waited, notebooks and recorders ready. Are you prepared for their questions? Linda asked quietly. Jasmine smiled. Yes, but more importantly, I'm prepared for the work still ahead of us. This isn't the end of our story, it's just the beginning of a new chapter. Together, they stepped forward to meet the press, two women whose confrontation had evolved into collaboration, whose misunderstanding had led to meaningful change. As the questions began, Jasmine felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The transformation of Skylink Airways was well underway, proving that sometimes the most challenging moments could become the most valuable opportunities if one had the courage to see them as such.